Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Water is calm, it's tranquil, it's the stuff of life. It's where all life originates from. And it reminds me of a time when I was in Guantanamo in my maximum security isolation cell in 2004. Of all things, a crab walked into my cell. And my first response was to find a way to repel it. So I filled a cup of water and threw it at this crab. And what this crab did next reminded me of the purpose of this water. And the crab started to scoop up the water that I threw at it and didn't see it as an attack. Rather, it saw the water as a blessing. But this blessing was something that we were denied in Bagram, where I was held there in 2003, where we weren't given enough water to make wudu with, only enough water to drink with daily. And so we were not able to make wudu, the ritual purification that's required for Muslims before prayer times. And as Allah said in the Quran, فَإِن فَلَمْ تَجْدُ مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. If you find no water, then do the dry ablution, which literally means rubbing the hands and rubbing the face, and that's it. So by the time I was sent to Guantanamo, where I did have access to water, I'd forgotten how to make wudu. I'd forgotten the tartib, or the sequence of wudu. Coming into contact with water, a person feels rejuvenated, alive, refreshed, and clean. Water, as everyone knows, has a calming effect. As Muslims, we're told that to quell our anger, we should ritually purify ourselves with water. The religion of Islam itself was born out of a desert where a child beat its feet in the eternal spring of Zamzam, gave birth to the city of Mecca. Despite that, being in a barren wasteland, a way of life emerged from this place that instructs Muslims to ritually and physically purify themselves several times a day. Everybody understands the nature of the purity of water and its life-giving characteristics, but there's no escaping its potential for destruction. In Guantanamo, on the rare occasion prisoners were let out, we sometimes caught a glimpse of the shimmering blue sea at a distance. I often wondered about sailing across it to anywhere, just to imagine freedom. I also imagined another sort of freedom. There are frequently tropical rainstorms in Cuba, and we as prisoners didn't get the choice of when to go out. But I do remember an occasion where a guard asked me if I wanted to go out for exercise during a torrential downpour. "You're going to get wet," he said. "I know," I replied, but I said, "I haven't felt the rain on my skin for a very long time, and besides, you'll get wet too." Sometimes the storms were so powerful that the wind was so strong and the rain so heavy that I prayed that Allah would use it to destroy the whole of the Guantanamo Complex, with me in it, just so I could be free. Throughout history, water has been used or withheld as a weapon. Dictators and invaders alike have on occasion cut off water supplies during sieges, battles, and rebellions. In more recent times, one extremely disturbing story was related to me by a Guantanamo prisoner. He'd survived a massacre at the underground section of the qala-i-jangi fortress in Afghanistan in December 2001. He told me that during the siege by Afghan and US forces, the prisoners had been denied water for days. Relief came in the most ironic way. Following heavy bombardment, the military diverted a part of a river into the prison complex in order to drown the prisoners out. He explained that whilst he'd seen bodies of prisoners floating past him in the flooded prison and was on the verge of drowning himself, he saw the water, now contaminated with blood, urine, feces, dust, and petrol, as a blessing.
They had bombed us with airplanes, they had shot missiles, they had thrown grenades, they had shot us with all types of guns, they had poured gas on us and burned us, they had done everything you can imagine. So the last thing they did was they poured water down into the basement. They wanted to fill it up with water.
This wasn't the only abuse of the stuff of life during the War on Terror. The practice known as waterboarding, that has become highly controversial in recent times, was used by the Bush administration and the CIA against suspected terrorists. Some prisoners now in Guantanamo were waterboarded hundreds of times. Waterboarding was first used during the Spanish Inquisition in the decades following the reconquest of Spain from Islamic rule. In order to root out heretical beliefs of Christians, Jews, and particularly Muslims, the technique of water torture was employed. A A person would be strapped and tied down to a bunk, including the arms, legs, and head, and water would be poured continuously over the person's nose and mouth in order to literally drown the person, even though he would not be submerged. Although Obama eventually has accepted that Americans tortured some folk through waterboarding, the Bush administration has refused to do so and referred to it as enhanced interrogation techniques, despite the fact that Japanese soldiers who waterboarded US POWs in World War II were successfully prosecuted and executed for war crimes. More disturbingly, the current Republican Party frontrunner for the US presidency, Donald Trump, has said that he would use waterboarding and a lot more again. Like him, the Spanish inquisitors had no compunction either. They called this technique tortura del agua, torture of the water. They used the stuff of life to infuse the feeling of death, but it didn't work. Water will always be connected to life. It can be used for good, and as we've seen, for evil too. Some of us have too much water, while others don't have enough. Droughts and floods both prove that. 2/3 of this planet, with human beings, animals, and plants, is made up of water, and despite its abundance, the Prophet ﷺ warned us to not waste water, even from the banks of a flowing river. 70% of our body is made up of water. Water forms an important part of our universal identity that connects every form of life together. Once, when a man asked the Prophet ﷺ where he came from, he replied, "Nahnu min al-ma', we are from water."
وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ